So it is Now and Next. Welcome in, Dave Trafford here, and it's a special edition of Now and Next. We came up with a whole new graphic and everything. It's politically speaking, and kind of offsets the bi-weekly sessions that we do with the cast and crew on Now and Next, who are our comms and strategy team. So I just thought today we want to get into the conversation that was sparked based on the Liberal leadership count and so on. What's next? Where do we go? So welcome in, a little bit out of the schedule. For those of you, by the way, who have been listening to On the Ledge, Ontario Politics podcast, thanks for doing that. We had a whole bunch of new folks jumping into the show, so we'll be picking that ball up soon as well as we continue with the fun and games here. All right, around the table for this version of Politically Speaking, John Tory is here. He's the former mayor of the city of Toronto. Keith Leslie is a Queen's Park commentator. You see and hear him on CHTV in Hamilton. John Wright is our veteran pollster from On the Ledge. And Kathleen Wynne is the former premier of Ontario. And I just think one of the things that struck me about the vote yesterday, the vote count yesterday, Kathleen Wynne, that basically a coronation of Mark Carney, I think it surprised everybody. There was probably a few people in the know who understood what the numbers were like. But normally in a leadership convention, and you would have had this experience, when you win, you bring all the other candidates up on the stage and everybody's holding hands and it's a show of unity. There was no need for that yesterday when the guy who won on the first ballot had 86% of the vote.
Yeah, it was an awesome win on Carney's part. As you say, I don't think anybody was surprised that he won, but I think all of us were surprised that it was that big a win on the first ballot. I certainly was. He got the mandate that Ford was looking for in the provincial election, right? No, I think it was pretty clear that there was unity in the room, though, Dave. And in his remarks, he referenced all of his colleagues who had run, and I think he's going to move very quickly now to establish the go forward. I think, what do I know? But I think we're going to go into an election pretty soon, very quickly, I think, and then that will, either consolidate or not his mandate to go forward. But it was, as a Liberal, I was very, very happy yesterday to see that level of energy and unity in the room. It really pleased me.
Well, John Wright, that whole idea of the Liberals making a sort of a decisive decision in many ways. There was no kind of equivocation about who they would want, who would be good, bad, or otherwise. Karina Gould was a media darling, but barely made up, the margin of error in terms of her vote here. Not to say that she doesn't have a place here, but the party really did pronounce itself.
Yeah, and it's one of the few times when media hype actually meets the reality. I mean, everyone expected that Mark Carney would win. Secondly, it allows the Liberals to go forward without any backfighting. I mean, there's no factions, no nothing. This was a crushing win. And thirdly, I think anybody who looked around as to where the vote came from saw it in all of the ridings, particularly, I'm going to say, Krista Freeland had, 8% of the people walking around shaking her hand, talking to her, and saying nice things to her, but also in her own riding, only about 12% actually voted for her. And that's an amazing, feat. So it was an all-around solid situation, which bodes well, I think, for the Liberals going into the campaign.
John Tory, the number that struck me after the fact was that Mark Carney won in every riding across the country.
Well, and I think most particularly, you had two MPs. John Wright mentioned one, Christian Freeland, the other one being Karina Gould. So they both had riding associations, and I don't think it was a disloyalty to them at all. I think what it was, and you can never sort of read these mass, occurrences across the country involving hundreds of thousands of people. But I think a lot of people just concluded at the end of the day, who might have been intending to vote for one of the others, that we better skip that part that you mentioned, which is the kind of unity part. We don't have time to be having sort of kumbaya sessions, because a lot of them don't just happen on stage. They happen behind the scenes where you're plugging people in, to the party apparatus and so on. I think people maybe came to the conclusion they knew who was going to win. If he'd won with 54% yesterday, I must say, by the way, I was just party presidents up there making this speech, and it's one of those things. I guess that was his moment in the sun, but you're just saying, like, get on with it, buddy. But my reaction was, wow, like, I could not believe. I thought he was going to say 58 or 62, and he said a number over 80. But it just means they can more or less skip that part. They have to bring some people in and so on, but it's not of necessity. It was a unified room and a unified party in making that choice. So now he's able to get on with the rest of it.
Well, timing is everything in many ways as well, and when this all plays out, and the whole rally around elbows up. I think the Prime Minister used that phrase in his outgoing speech yesterday in Ottawa. There was a rally out there that in Ottawa that was dealing with it. Our friend Bill Carroll was up there talking to the crowd, and you can see there was a real energy around it, and it was bipartisan. Keith, it wasn't just about Conservatives or Liberals or NDP. These were all Canadians out there waving the flag and saying elbows up. So you got to give Trudeau at least some credit in terms of being able to take advantage of that moment. I had no idea whether or not he did that purposefully or not, but it was a performance.
Absolutely. It's what Canadians were looking to see. And as you say, it goes across all parties. Everybody was out there. The whole elbows up thing, Mike Myers doing it at the end of Saturday night each week. It's something that's on people's minds, and it's part of the unifying thing. I think it was part of Jean Chrétien during his speech there. He summed that all up, and he stopped this nonsense, one old man to another. He had the room read very well. I think Carney getting 86% really just solidified everything. I think we have to look at how good Karina Gould's communications people were, because she was certainly expecting, I think we were all expecting, that she was going to get a heck of a lot more than 3.2% out of that rally or out of that vote. She did very well, and I think she's definitely has a future in the party, but 3.2% was pretty weak. Although for Chrystia Freeland, barely getting 8%, as others have noted, it wasn't a loyalty thing at all as to whether there are people. I think they're looking at who can win the election. We're going to have an election, maybe not in October, probably within a few weeks. Who can win that damn election? And it wasn't going to be some, fairly new cabinet minister that no one in Canada knew. And it wasn't going to be Chrystia Freeland. That she was just far, far, far too closely tied to Justin Trudeau. So it was going to be who can win the election. That was Mark Carney, and he was the one that the Liberals could actually tout as change. I know the Tories are trying to mock it. He's not really changed. It's a sneaky thing they're claiming. Sneaky, come on. That's a weak argument. It was an incredible victory by him. And it's going to, as we say now, at least the Liberal Party, and in that room, they had to book an overflow room. They weren't sure they were going to fill that room. They had to book an overflow. So from there all around, they've really got a bit of momentum. Can it spill out beyond the Liberal Party faithful and members? We'll see, but they certainly have a bit of momentum. And I think that's what we'll see, Carney moving quickly to, get himself organized and get ready for the election.
Dave, can I just jump in? I just want to reinforce something that Keith has said about the loyalty, and John said it too. I don't think Karina Gould getting the numbers that she got, or even Chrystia or Bayless, I don't know Bayless at all, but I don't think it says anything about, how Karina Gould's supporters felt about her or how people felt about her performance. I think it really is about a moment where people are very anxious and they really wanted to skip to the conclusion. And it does not mean anything about what Karina Gould's future, for example, is going to hold. So I just think we need to recognize that. So those numbers, that's 3%. I don't think that is a meaningful number in terms of predicting what her career is going to be going forward.
So let me ask you this then: if that were the case, John Tory, did Chrystia Freeland do herself a disservice by actually throwing her hat in the ring here, sensing that Mark Carney was probably going to be, the odds-on favorite to win? I realized early on it was hard to say, just generally speaking, but Karina Gould can be seen to be the next generation. There's a new leadership that we need to draw upon. She can be that. I see other cabinet ministers who didn't take the opportunity to step in, and much of the commentary was, well, maybe next time, because it was still a little iffy around how long this particular leader was going to be prime minister and sit in that chair.
Look, I think it took a lot of courage for any of them to run, because at the end of the day, while things certainly look different today than they did before this all started, it's still a very difficult path for this new prime minister or whoever else had won to go along and to emerge victorious. It's certainly better odds than it was before. I think Chrystia Freeland wasn't from the next generation per se. She was from this generation, and I think it was almost necessary that she did step up because she had been the deputy prime minister. Let's not forget she had also been somebody very involved, if I could put it that way, in the departure of the prime minister, Trudeau. And so I think she kind of had to step up. And so in that sense, I think she did what she had to do, and it wasn't based on political calculus. I mean, if she had won, she'd have been the prime minister. She didn't, but I think she will still be a senior player if she chooses to be, and they all had said they would be in Mr. Carney's administration. So, in that sense, I don't think she expended any sort of particular political capital. I mean, you always do when you lose a little bit, but I just think in her case, she can emerge out of this as a key player in his government, and then we'll see going forward how long that government lasts in the context of the election to come.
Yeah, John Wright, the idea that Chrystia Freeland will play a role in a Carney government is the question mark for sure. But his overwhelming win means he doesn't owe any of them anything. He did this all on their own. It's not like somebody was a kingmaker here.
Well, true, and maybe she'd accept U.S. ambassador to Washington. That certainly would be a fun moment. I'm just joking. Look, I think when you really look at it, there were. Chrystia Freeland was tied to the Trudeau agenda. She was it. She was part and parcel of that. What I heard from Karina Gould was two things. Number one, she not only represents the future, but a young future. I mean, she connects with young people. If anything, there was speculation yesterday in the vote that a lot of older Liberals weren't going to be able to qualify because they couldn't work the app, and she might overwhelm them because she's got all the young bucks who are out there doing that sort of thing. So she represents a really, really important part of the future in galvanizing young people to get involved. But the other part was her speech alone. When you listened to it and contrasted it with Carney, there were two very different visions. One was the Trudeau legacy with Karina Gould, talking about healthcare and home care and daycare and all of the things that she had been part of there and representing it going forward. Carney, I am a pragmatist, and within the sweep of a moment, took care of the carbon tax, the capital gains tax, a whole series of other things that were implied during that speech, and left himself open for a lot of flexibility going forward. I mean, we all know that we've entered campaigns, much like the Ford campaign, where you can pretty well predict the script and how things are going to unfold, even though you're dealing with an environment that has got some flexibility and some challenges to it. We don't know at all, whether it's the Conservatives, NDP, or the Liberals, what Donald Trump's going to do hour by hour. And so he has given some openings now for the Liberal Party to be pragmatic, meaning adapt with change, make decisions that are going to be different from the past. But I noted he's tucked her idea of the Liberal Party up behind him. He should give her a prominent role, that's for sure, but brings along the youth core of that Liberal Party that's absolutely critical for the future.
Well, the thread that was pulled through that entire presentation, though, with Karina Gould being the focus of it in terms of the sort of the new breath and blood for the Liberals, we got to take a few minutes here and just nod to Prime Minister Chrétien, who, for all intents and purposes, I think owned the room for that 20 or 15 minutes, whatever it was. It didn't feel like a long period of time, but boy, he sure hit the highlights.
Governments have absolutely right in retaliating as they have, and I congratulate all of them. If it is necessary, the governments altogether can consider going further, anything the Americans where it really hurts, by imposing an export tax on oil, gas, potash, steel, aluminum, and electricity. And we'll use that money to build infrastructure that are needed in Canada. For example, to build a pipeline for natural gas from Alberta to Quebec. From one old guy to another old guy. Stop this nonsense. Canada will never join the United States. I can tell you that my parents were not millionaires from New York. They were workers from Shawinigan. But my mother taught us good manners. She would have been ashamed of me if I had treated anyone the way that the president treated my prime minister and the president in Ukraine in the last few weeks. The reason we don't want to become American is because our values as Canadians. We are proud Canadians, and yes, we owe a debt of recognition to Mr. Trump. He has united us as never before. So I want to say thank you to him, and I think I will propose him for the Order of Canada. I'm just kidding. Canada is and will remain the best country in the world. Vive le Canada!
You can only aspire to have that level of wit, energy at the age of 81, never mind 91. He was, say what you will about it. Kathleen Wynne, you talked off the top about the energy of the Liberal Party. Maybe that's what was needed, a little bit more Jean Chrétien in the last few years in terms of that energy and that. We keep talking about how he's the street fighter, etc. And I was thinking as I was watching that, I'm thinking, if he were the prime minister today, he wouldn't have hesitated to talk that way to Donald Trump.
Right, right. His direct manner, his honesty, his wit it's perfect. It was perfect for that day. It's perfect for this moment. And I think, he has been quiet, and he came out and spoke when he needed to speak. It was a fine moment, and people in the room loved it. That was the thing. He generated, and always does generate, that affection, that adulation and loyalty. It was just a great moment. But he's funny. I think that's the thing that really warms people's hearts. They're not quite sure what he's going to say next, and then he says the thing and brings people together. But he also talked about values. He was making a serious plea to the party, and the message to Donald Trump was very clear. I loved it. The room loved it, obviously, and it's going to be part of what gives Carney the kind of push into this next couple of weeks.
John Tory, it gives them cover too. I mean, in as much as Chrétien said some of the things that right now politically people are kind of dancing around in terms of where we should go with potash, where we should go with pipelines, where we should go with oil. He was, definitive. We can't fight this unless we do that.
Definitely. And I don't know for a fact whether the routine that has been established with Mr. Trudeau not saying certain things, but Doug Ford saying them. I happened to see Doug Ford twice on CNN over the course of the weekend. And, he's talking very straight and very direct in the same way that Mr. Chrétien does. He doesn't use as much humor because the occasion doesn't, determine he should on those interviews. But I think it does give Mr. Carney the ability to kind of be what he is, which is kind of, I think he's going to stand a chance in the election because he is a serious, learned person who's been through these kinds of crises and so on before. He'll have to put his dukes up, both with Polievre and with Mr. Trump potentially. I'm also fascinated, just looking back at what Mr. Chrétien said when I watched it yesterday and again today. How will Donald Trump treat a new Prime Minister of Canada? Because I was astonished, just in the sort of annals of any diplomacy over any period of time, decades and centuries, at the disrespect that President Trump showed to a Canadian prime minister, this one or any other one. And, when Mr. Carney is sworn in, will Donald Trump resume that, which I find unbelievable that he would, but with him, anything is possible? Or will he actually maybe show some respect and prove that all that commentary about Mr. Trudeau and Governor Trudeau was more directed at Mr. Trudeau than it was at us or at our prime minister? But I think it's given Mr. Carney quite a bit of license.
Well, in many respects, John Wright, people make the mistake of saying Donald Trump plays 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers. And I maintain he's just a checker player. He's transactional. It's one move at a time. There may be a couple of things that he's got in his back pocket.
He cheats.
But here's the criticism. Here's the criticism I can already hear that Trump is going to make of Carney. He's a central banker. And he isn't really in love with his own central bank right now. So the idea that, he's going to kind of cozy up to Carney, maybe not. But I wonder whether or not that doesn't work in Mark Carney's favor in a campaign, similar to the way it worked in many ways to Doug Ford, but it adds that added element of it, a personal attack on Carney.
Yeah, I think to unpack, you've said a lot of really good things. I mean, to unpack it, number one, we've already seen in the last week or so with the falling stock markets, which again are plummeting, Trump calling out the globalists, and he's part of that regime in Trump's view. The second thing, though, is I think we got to step back from this and see that we do have a long process ahead of us just in terms of campaigning. I mean, we are speculated to have, the writ drawn up soon to go to a campaign which would have a date by the end of April or the beginning of May. Then you got to think of whoever wins that, and we don't know at the moment. We've got a transition. Does it take a month? Does it take, 8 weeks or so? Because you've got, as we all know, we've got swearing in of a cabinet. You're not going to have the same luxury of waiting until, the end of July, August, or September, which you normally would kind of give portfolios to ministers and say, see you in the fall with a throne speech. We have a concentrated 120-day period of time now where we're out in the open. And that, whether it be Mr. Polievre or Mr. Singh or Mr. Carney himself, whether it be our institutions or otherwise, regardless of what Mr. Trump may respond to immediately to Mr. Carney, it's going to be hourly. So I don't know. That's the one vulnerability we have in this campaign. I mean, we have two former leaders on this podcast, which is a really great thing to have because they worked in an environment where there was some measure of predictability to a campaign. And secondly, we just finished with a Ford campaign that in itself was fortuitous to launch into a window and keep it on the rails. But I don't think that's the case here. And, the Liberals, may be wrapping a plane, but they still have a lot of candidates to get in place. Mr. Carney, at the moment, hasn't announced where he's going to run, although there's lots of options that he could have. I just think that this is the most precarious and unpredictable campaign we've ever had. And I think it's going to be that way for at least the next 120 days that we're going to have to deal with.
John, Tory, the thing that struck me when Carney first took the stage and he, made his pronouncement, got through all of his thank yous vis-a-vis policy, made it clear that he was running against Polievre and he was putting the Trudeau legacy in the rearview mirror.
So my government will immediately eliminate the divisive consumer carbon tax on families and farmers and small and medium-sized businesses. And we will stop the hike in the capital gains tax because we think builders should be incentivized for taking risks and rewarded when they succeed.
That clip finishes with Prime Minister Trudeau sitting in the front row, just kind of nodding. And it was a necessary, uncomfortable moment, John Tory.
Well, it was, but that's not going to stop Mr. Polievre from saying, well, here's a few clips of what you had to say about the carbon tax a little while ago. So, I mean, that's why this campaign, as John Wright said, is going to matter. And I think that, but Mr. Carney did a good job yesterday of beginning to separate himself. It wasn't the first time he talked about the carbon tax or the capital gains tax, but trying to separate himself as he has to do. And what he's got to do is hope that he gets the same experience Doug Ford has, which is where the real opposition isn't Pierre Polievre. In fact, even better, he can have Donald Trump as the real opposition and tie Pierre Polievre as he tried to do yesterday. I thought it was quite a clever turn of phrase where he said, Donald Trump is trying to conquer us. Poilievre is trying to, prepare us to be conquered with his approach. And I think that's what he's got to do, is tie the two of them together, and then he could end up in the same fortuitous circumstance that Mr. Ford did during his election.
Well, Keith, that's the linchpin there, so that if Trump doesn't like Carney, it's easier to, throw shade on Poilievre. I mean, there's a real complexity to this that could work in his favor.
Well, absolutely. To complete the quote that John Tory was just talking about there, it was, if someone worships Trump, he's going to kneel before him, not stand up to him. And I think that was indeed the quote of the night for Carney. He's linking them both together, and why not run against both of them? I mean, already we've seen, we've all talked about how the election has completely changed. Donald Trump just changed the Ontario election. Now he's going to change the federal election completely. The dynamics of, the Liberals have to go, Trudeau has to go. Trudeau's gone. And Carney came up and said, well, the carbon tax is gone. The other tax, we're going to take that off to the capital gains tax. It's gone. It's going to be a whole new campaign, and it's going to be all about Trump. Doesn't matter what what Poilievre comes out. And all he come up with so far is carbon tax, Carney, hammering home those ads, just overflooding the market, still basically saying Canada, yesterday, the big conservative rally in London, Poilievre said what the Liberals were doing was sneaky, replacing Trudeau with Carney. Sneaky? I think someone posted something like 11 of our 23 prime ministers have been appointed by their party, a prime minister designate before they get elected in a general election. There's nothing sneaky about this. It's the parliamentary way it's done. He knows it well, and to play people to intentionally play stupid like that, I think goes against him. Is reading the room all wrong. They need to find something else to come at the Liberals with. Now, again, I still think the Liberals have basically all but eliminated the huge 25-point lead the Tories had in the polls, but it doesn't mean that they're prepared to get reelected. There's still a lot of anger about the past 10 years of Liberal government, so they still have some things to counter. And Carney, will he be seen as the real change or not? Clearly, the Liberals see him as change. Will Canadians see him as change?
Well, Kathleen Wynne, by that grade, you would have been a sneaky premier.
Exactly. I know. I kept saying, "But wait a minute. This is how it works, people. This is how it works." Yeah, I think that one of the other lines that Carney delivered kind of points to, yes, he's getting rid of the carbon tax, but back to his values. He talked about Canadian values. He also said, Pierre Polievre is going to let Canada burn. And I think, the notion that we as Liberals are going to back away from doing the things that we need to do to sustain our country, sustain our communities. I was encouraged to hear that. I think that people need to know that this is a serious person who understands the economic issues, but also understands that the economy goes beyond a balance sheet, that the economy includes people, it includes what people need in their lives. And I think that's the kind of Liberal that he is. And I think that's part of why, yes, it's about winnability. And I hear Scott Reid talk about, the only thing Liberals think about is whether the next leader can win the election. Yes. But this Liberal and many Liberals think about, what does this person stand for? What kind of human being is he? And how is he going to treat other human beings? And I think that is going to give Carney a huge advantage over Pierre Polievre in the election.
So I want everybody's take on this, because I missed it the first time when I watched it live. And then I was going through it again this morning. It struck me that Carney talked about Trump, but only against the backdrop of Poilievre. He talked about the threat of Canada against the backdrop of America.
The Americans want our resources, our water, our land, our country. Think about it. If they succeeded, they would destroy our way of life. In America, healthcare is a big business. In Canada, it is a right. Thank you. America is a melting pot. Canada is a mosaic. And Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form. Look, we didn't ask for this fight. We didn't ask for this fight. But Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win. Aux Americans.
And John Wright, one of the other lines was, in the United States, healthcare is a business. In Canada, it's a right. So he distinguished between Trump and the Americans. And, for the last 2 months, everybody said, "Oh, it's not about the Americans, it's about Donald Trump." That was pretty subtle, but it was an important point because he repeated it several times throughout his speech.
Well, he's really talking about the cultural divide. All of us who are on this panel will have heard those phrases many times before in our life, especially about the melting pot mosaic. But it also sends a signal that to young liberals and others that these are the important principles that he's going to deal with. Look, he still is going to be prime minister. He still is going to have to deal with Mr. Trump. And so I don't think he could be as outlandish as others might. But the reality is he had to bring to that floor and to bring to the country our first sense of what Mark Carney is about. This was really, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And granted, the Conservatives are going to paint his wagon as much as possible. But all of the clips that we've seen today were such a contrast between the prime minister who was before him on the stage. I think we have to take into account, the polls do show that the Conservatives are in line for a majority government. That is a fact. You need 37%. They're hovering around 39%. The Liberals have gone from 19% in the polls up to about 31, 32. But on a case-by-case ballot NDP Conservative Liberal point of view, there still is this gap that the Conservatives own. The question then has been, well, what does Mark Carney bring to the party? And the reality is that it's been a bit of a phony war. I call it the propensity to vote. It's kind of like we knew that 30% of committed voters to the NDP and the Conservatives were willing to take a second look at the Liberal Party. Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch have heard something out there and they've gone, yeah, I think I'll take a look at this. And it's drawn it up right to dead even, almost 37, 38%. Where the outline poll, I would say at the moment, but not in a bad way for their methodology, was Léger, which did show by the end of the week that the Conservatives were way back up in the polls. I got to say that if you're beyond the 19% of Canadians who were Trudeau Liberals to the end, you just want this former Liberal leader gone. And we have been reminded over the last 10 days where he's been in the front window and on the television every single moment, how damaging that brand has been in the last period of time. I think, again, Mr. Carney is trying to present a new face to the Liberal Party. He's got to obviously deal with the Conservatives who are going to attack that, but he's also dealing with Donald Trump for the first time. So better to support the values and draw the contrast than directly go after the man. There'll be lots of time for that. But this is a new Liberal Party. Let's make no bones about it. They're going to have to run it in a very different way, but by keeping some of the main tenets that have held it together for the last number of, decades.
John Tory, some of the analysis after the whole thing was finished last night was, the guy's not a politician, and he's got to learn how to be a little bit more energetic and personal in terms of his presence on the stage. I don't hear anybody typically off the top of their head say that. I understand why people respond to that charisma factor. But in this circumstance, I just get the impression people want an adult in the room. And if nothing else,
good point.
Mark Carney has presented himself as an adult in the room.
I think that's exactly right. I've heard people saying, look, we've got this international crisis. What we need is somebody who is going to be qualified to deal with an international crisis, maybe even has some experience. There aren't many people who do, and who, doesn't come across. And I have been a politician, as has Kathleen. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with sometimes behaving as a politician will, but at the same time, I think the kind of reassurance, the kind of adult behavior, the kind of steadiness, including the fact he was smart enough not to take on Donald Trump personally last night, because I think it also will highlight, if he didn't, and he doesn't for now, take him on directly personally, that if Trump responds by taking him on the way he did Justin Trudeau, that it helps Mark Carney. So I just think, that charisma thing, look, he'll have to perform in the debates. He'll have to put his dukes up, as I said earlier on, both with Polievre and with the United States. But I think people are looking for that kind of adult leadership. And I think, to John's point about the polling, what could be quite compelling if they can get Donald Trump to be the issue and Polievre to be married to him, is going to be to say, I need a majority to deal with this. I need a strong mandate. They may never use the word majority, but I need a strong mandate. And that could actually persuade a lot of people who are looking to have some stability in that 120 days and beyond that you talked about.
Well, the interesting thing is, Keith, that when you listen to Mark Carney and his sort of laser vision, here's what we're going to have to do, and here's how we're going to have to fight back. Boy, you could have put the script in Doug Ford's hands 2 weeks ago.
You could, but Ford would have delivered it more animated. There's just no two ways around it. But that's not the point.
The path is the same, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, the path is the same, and he's going to work it. But he's just going to work it differently. But I think, we'll go back to a former boss of John Tory's, Brampton Bill Davis, who said, was it bland works or boring works or
bland works? Yeah.
Bland works. And in this case, we're absolutely looking for an adult in the room to deal with Donald Trump, because, putting in someone else who's just going to slogan back at him is not really what we need right now. We need someone who has the international experience, the financial experience. This is an economic war that's been declared against us, and it threatens our sovereignty. What more do we want than someone who's going to be cool, level-headed, and has dealt with some pretty major international crises himself? So I think that gives him a huge, huge advantage in going up against Trump without necessarily taking Trump. I mean, to the idea of, again, just tying Polievre to Trump and everything the conservatives do and the slashing and burning. Well, that's going to, if they can echo all that and tag Polievre with that, the Liberals will continue to close that gap. They're within the margin of error now. So depending on how quick and how strong Carney thinks his support can be and how quick he'll call that election, it's a race. I think it's going to be a real race this time. And I think it's because primarily what you said, he may be a bit dry in the delivery stage. Well, he'll get better in a debate or not. But I don't think debates really, for the most part, change most people's minds. The people that really want to watch them, that spend for the whole time with the debate, are those of us like us that are really engaged, and the people that listen to these types of podcasts. Others just see the clips the next day. And Carney, for the most part, I think will be able to hold his own, and that's all you really need to do in a leader's debate.
Yeah, and I need to jump in a couple of things. So I think that when we're talking about charisma, I don't think the comparison, John, right to your point, the comparison, yeah, I guess for some people it will be comparing him to Trudeau. Trudeau had oodles of positive charisma, and that faded over time for people. But Pierre Polievre's got oodles of negative charisma. So I think that the comparison going forward, and Carney's talking about going forward, is going to be, how does this guy measure up against Pierre Polievre? And to the point about an adult in the room, the reason people want an adult in the room is they want someone who can talk in paragraphs. And sure, you can get someone to talk in slogans, and yeah, you can put those words in Doug Ford's mouth or whomever, but Mark Carney actually understands what he's talking about. He can actually weave the slogan into the strategy, and he can use his experience as the background. So I think that's the difference between this man and Pierre Polievre, for sure. And it is the difference between him and Trump. Now, that's another whole thing. Do we think Trump is going to respect him? No, I don't think Trump respects anybody particularly. And so I think that's a whole other issue. But in terms of him getting through this next election, he's going to be put up against Pierre Polievre, and that is what the image is going to be. Is he going to be able to be that adult in the room, talk in a way that people can understand, and not be that angry, mean person who is going to be standing across the podium from him?
John Wright?
I would agree entirely. I also think there's a couple of other things. Number one, the Liberals were running some ads online last week, which really just basically said, not this time. It's effectively, what, the Conservative leader may have some good points, but it's not this time for that kind of change. The second thing is, you can't get away from the fact, and I say this as I always do, a completely nonpartisan matter, that he's a nasty guy. That is something which you hear from people. It's all talking points. Even when I was listening to Brian Lilley interviewing him on Friday of last week, I mean, it's all, carbon tax, Carney, carbon, it's all the alliteration of the attack points. What I think he's going to have to deal with is that people want to have a conversation. And Mark Carney last night put a whole different tone on that room. There was the kind of breathy Trudeau era and I've been with you and all, the voice, the whole thing. And then he comes on stage, it's kind of like, hi, we got a situation we got to deal with. It was like a lowering of the temperature. Now, some people said, oh, this is boring. He can't connect. I don't think people are looking for the hysterics. And I think they're looking for more than they've heard the talking points. Even in the following hours where the social media went nuts with all of the conservative advertising, which you'd expect, it was all talking points. It was all those bullets. I think we're going to have to watch these candidates for themes, but I also again go back to the fact that once you've got talking points down, if your opponent changes significantly, I know you're going to try and drive it forward as it was the case. So he's just like everybody else. And yeah, he said about carbon tax. But for people who are paying attention, Mark Carney's agenda has changed. It's different. And his tone is different. And, I think that first impressions matter. The Conservatives are going to have to take that into account over the next month or so, because you can't do what you've been doing to Trudeau and do it with a new personality and a new platform.
And I think, Dave, if I can, one of the things I heard another pollster, there are others, not as good, John, but
good ones, many good ones.
They had never experienced an electorate, whether it wasn't just so much about Trudeau, but it was also just about everything, that was so angry about things. And the question, I think, is going to become whether that anger can be replaced by insecurity and concern about where we are at this moment in history. And then the antidote becomes not somebody who's angry, because Kathleen is so right. I mean, he if I was Mark Carney in a debate, I'd turn to Polievre if he's just carrying on with the same script and say, why are you so angry all the time? Like, we're trying to, make the country better and survive through this difficult period. I think you'd sort of point that out, because I think people recognize it. And that is the sort of Trump thing as well. Like, he's an angry, kind of person. But I just think that's the key, is going to be to change anger, if it's still out there, which I think it is, to insecurity about a whole lot of things, including Trump, but also pocketbook, economy. And that's what Mark Carney's talking about, building the economy.
But John, don't you think it's not even, I totally agree with you, but I think it's not even so much changing that anger into anxiety. I think it's the anxiety first that's fueling the anger, And so if somebody can meet me in my anxiety, that people are saying, well, what does meet the moment mean? Well, it actually means understanding where we are and being able to step to where I need you to be, And so I think that it can be a relief for people to not have someone yelling at them and asking them to be even angrier, And I think I honestly believe Carney is capable of that.
Yep.
Well, and one of the things, John, Tory, that, to your point, though, around the polls, I saw, maybe it was Nick Nanos yesterday, I forget who it was, but a few weeks ago, we were looking at the Leger polling that was out, and we looked at the issues in the provincial election, and Trump was number 5 in terms of concern. I think Nick's numbers yesterday had Trump number 1, and all the polls have kind of gone that way, where this has risen to this height now, where maybe Doug Ford was a little bit ahead of the curve on some of this. So that might be the dynamic we're heading for.
Well, and what's fascinating, and of course it will likely change one way or another during an election if it comes soon, is that very little has actually happened. There's been all these, on again, off again tariff things, but I think the only one that is imminent is the steel and aluminum. I'm not minimizing that, but I'm just saying the other ones have all been postponed and, rethought and this and that. But I think that's why, because they've turned it into a soap opera, and I don't want to, again, minimize that, that the issue has risen, because that fuels insecurity. People are, you're worse. Sometimes when something bad's going to happen, you'd rather get it over with, and know where you were going. In this case, we've had this kind of thing hanging over our heads, because that's the way he conducts himself. And I don't think it's a scheme, by the way. I think it's incompetence down there, total incompetence. But having said that, you're right. I think it now is the top issue, and Carney's challenge will be to make it continue to be the top issue and not get distracted, just like Doug Ford did. And let's remember how much help Doug Ford had from Donald Trump. Donald Trump, through this soap opera, kept it going during the entirety of the Ontario election campaign and allowed Ford to keep on that issue and have, I think, 3 days out of 30 that were on healthcare and education and other things that should have been discussed, just because that's what elections are for.
Well, Trump unhinged is frightening.
I just got a question for you. One of the things that came up yesterday in terms of timing, and yes, it's the urgency around the tariffs, it's the urgency around what Trump's up to. But one of the panels, I don't know if it was CTV or CBC, somebody had said it's also about the money that the parties have and the amount they can spend on advertising. And the Tories have a ton of cash. So the longer the Liberals wait, the more cash they can spend before the election, tearing down Carney before they get into a campaign.
Apparently, the Tories have more money than the Liberals and the New Democrats combined. You probably throw the Greens in there for all the money they would have. So the Conservatives are absolutely, and they're going to spend it, and they're going to spend it directly. A lot of online stuff directly targeting Carney, to the people they think that will most likely support them. They're going to use it to divide people. I mean, that's what's going on here. It's best if they can upset people, get them divided, and say that Carney is just a copy of Trudeau and trying to link him back to the previous government, and not view him as change at all. Claiming it's sneaky that he's been put in as the PM designate. Will it work for them? I don't think so. I think again the mood in the room is Canadians are united. They're not buying this Canada is broken routine, and the Conservatives pushing that sort of angle. I think they're speaking to the people that are angered there, but the anxiety that Kathleen spoke about, it goes back to Trump being, and I think this is why it's increased more and played more into Doug Ford, because even though Trump hasn't actually done a heck of a lot, he's more unhinged every day in what he says. And it's not, so at first we were able to, laugh off sort of or dismiss the 51st state stuff. Then when he started going further, I'll just take Gaza and I'll put a resort in there, and then we'll just, heck, we'll start, we'll stop supporting, giving Ukraine air support and radars. They're basically siding with Russia now. Nobody saw this coming. And I think this is creating anxiety in Canada, not just about tariffs, but about everything. When the supposed leader of the free world is talking and siding with Russia, well, maybe he will come and want to take Canada, maybe not just by economic force. We don't know. I think that sort of anxiety is what needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed by Canada showing itself, united, not broken. And there was one little point, and I didn't hear Carney picking up on this. In Chrétien's very popular speech, he did deliver one little message there about the pipeline needs to be built from Alberta to Quebec. That's a real message in there. That was a real serious message in there to all of the country, basically, that if we're going to get rid of these interprovincial barriers that supposedly can almost offset the Trump tariffs, this is the kind of anger or issue that has to be dealt with. And it means Quebec is going to have to make some movement. And he also, of course, talked about tariffing all our energy exports as well. So he's pointing at Alberta, he's pointing at Quebec, and I didn't hear Carney willing to take that on, but I think that's what's going to be necessary, some federal leadership to get Canada to eliminate as many of those provincial chairs. I know it's 13 provincial leaders that have the control of this, but it's going to take federal leadership to, I think, really get this done.
Well, he did make the point, one economy, not 13.
Yes, he did.
And Chrétien softened the ground for him a little bit. That's what my point was. I think that where Chrétien was the right guy to come out there and really throw some punches and have some fun with it because of the Order of Canada invitation.
He was also a buffer, I think, because quite frankly, I thought, what have they got Trudeau up there so long for? He should have only been up there for 2-3 minutes, say thanks very much. But he went on, and I thought it was dragging on. It was really getting, I thought that's not the branding you want. You want him gone. And so Chrétien came on. He was a perfect buffer in there, and he raised the mood. He just, everything was respectful to Trudeau. But with Chrétien, it was beyond respect. There was, dare I say, the word love in the room. I mean, they just really like this guy. It's true. You just see it happening. And so I think he really set the tone.
I just want to say this. I remember one of the very first tutorials I ever had with Dr. Angus Reid. I didn't know really anything about polling. I went out to Vancouver. It was 1991. We were working on the very first environment syndicated study. And he handed me the data tables after we talked through all this stuff. And I said, so what do you want done next? He says, I want you to get back on the plane, and I want you to fly home, and I want you to read it all and tell me what the story is at the end. And I thought, what do you mean? And he said, in every data set, there's a story of romance and adventure, or pride and guilt. And he said, this one's probably about pride and guilt, where people feel pride in what they want to do, but guilty about not doing anything about the environment. And that was the brilliance of Angus Reid. I mean, he's a serial entrepreneur, but he's able to say, take the story and understand it, but then you own it. It's your story. It's not the data story. It's yours. So by the time I got back, it was precisely what it was, and there you go. So I've always looked at this, and look, you can get up with a 40% majority government and every morning believe that 60% pretty much either don't like you, but a good proportion hate you for what you're going to do. So the real issue that brought Justin Trudeau through in 2015, to me, was the final 10 days of the campaign, where dislike, distrust, hate, whatever you want to call it, gave way to a resolve among about 15% of the public. They just wanted hope. And at election campaigns, we always have to look at this and say, yeah, we can be into micro-targeting, we can do all the work that we want, but at the end of the day, it's about a character. It's about something that's very hard to capture at the time. And that is going to be the challenge going forward in the next couple of weeks, because again, we're in the character challenge, but the character will be challenged during real time. That's the issue. I mean, Pierre Polievre is not going to have control over it. Like, he's going to be buttoned in as much as he can. There'll be heightened scrutiny on what he says, but we're discovering the character of a new age. So I think there's always anger out there. And I think, as I like to say to my kids as a parent, spread the word, love people, and is the best quality. But I also say to them, in politics, anger has changed the world far more than love. I mean, it really has fueled, people who want to do things to change the world. And I think we're in that era right now where people want change, but they want resolve, and they want a mandate that allows them to say, I can put my trust in that person to look after me. And I think this is going to be I can't remember outside of the free trade debate years ago when something like that has swirled around. We don't have the raging grannies this time, for sure. But it harkens me back to those days when things seemed unsettled and angry, but people will be looking for hope, and it'll be not everybody, but it'll be looking for a slice of them.
Well, I think, John, right, you mentioned that, it's going to be about the people who are paying attention, and it's not just this group here and those like us. This might be the biggest change in terms of engagement. If this is the issue that comes up, and I mean, free trade did that, back in the 80s in terms of engaging an electorate. So a lot to do and a lot to talk about, and all good of you to jump in and do this for us today. John Tory, John Wright, Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, thank you. And this is our politically speaking version of Now and Next, and we do that bi-weekly with the cast, the comms and strategy team. So it's just good fun. But I thought, in this context, it's not really on the ledge, so we just went ahead and rebranded. So if you are enjoying the show, make sure you subscribe to the podcast feed, and of course, you get Now and Next and On the Ledge in the same YouTube channel. Otherwise, you can continue listening to us on the audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, etc. And so thanks for doing that. All right. I'm Dave Trafford. This is Now and Next. It's the politically speaking version of the episode from Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is Story Studio Network's flagship podcast, produced by our chief executive producer, Dave Trafford, and supported by our entire SSN team, including our senior producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler. Jamie Nickerson is our production manager, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Also, I'm Aaron Trafford, Queen of the Universe.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.